Hey Ottawa, this is your Monday Market Snapshot for the Ottawa Real Estate Market for Monday, June 10th, 2024. My name is Annalie Rice. I'm a realtor here in Ottawa, Ontario, and every week I bring you the details of what's going on in the Ottawa real estate market. So this week I've got the Ottawa Real Estate Board, Canadian Real Estate Association monthly stats for May, and I also did include just the updated ones from my month-end stats from last week. If you're looking for more details on those, I'm just going to kind of rush through them pretty quick. But if you're looking for the details, then head back to last week's update where I explain things a little bit more. Okay, let's see what's happening this week. Okay, so first off, we look citywide. We see that the inventory continued to climb. Last week we had a bit of a small climb, but this week it jumped back up by another 62. So our inventory levels are continuing to climb. We're not quite at the peak, I guess, at this point. And last week we had a jump up over the 300 mark for sales. This week we're slightly below at 296. So still strong sales, but a little bit lower than last week. When you look at the listings, you can see that it was mostly in the detached and towns that came on the market. The condo market did not climb by very much. And then for the sales, you see that the sales were way lower for condos, and the detached was where the higher number of sales happened. Okay, so this is our visual inventory breakdown. You can see that the overall inventory in black and the active inventory in green continue to rise, although it does look like we might be getting closer to the rising at a lower rate. So maybe we're getting closer to the peak. The dash lines there, the light dash lines, show you the difference between last year and this year for the same week. And so you can see, if you look at the numbers there, we're about 1,000 properties higher in inventory right now than we were last year at this time, which obviously makes it a totally different market than we were seeing last year. I do expect that to shrink, as you see, because the inventory last year was climbing at that point. Our sales this week, you can see, are on par to what we had last year at the same week. And the conditional sales is actually above. It's hard to see there because they're very close, but we had more conditional sales this week than we did firm sales. So I do expect next week we'll have a little bit of a jump, maybe, of the firm sales. Okay, so these charts are talking about inventory sort of for the longer term. The previous chart was just comparing it to last year, but this shows us here again that the inventory right now is higher than it's been for the last, in this case, 5 years. So you have to go all the way back to 2018. This is for the townhome, same thing, but it's actually a little worse. You have to go all the way back to 2016 to have the same level of inventory in May. And condos also, you have to go back to 2018. So our levels across the board for different property types are obviously very much higher than what they typically are in May. That's what the little red dots represent, is the May dots. Okay, so for new listings, we had 587 properties that were listed this week. 162 of those, which is 28%, were ones that were relisted. So that's the gray line at the bottom. You can see that it's climbing up. It's been sort of on a steady incline, but this week was a bit of a jump there. And we had 425 new to the market listings. That represented 72% of the properties that were listed this week. So the ratio typically back, throughout most of the spring was at about, 4 new listings to 1 relisted property. And then the last couple weeks we've been sitting up at like 3 to 1, so 25% being relisted. This week we're up at a 28%, so getting closer to the 1 to 3. So we're just gonna have to keep an eye on that. The properties people really do want to sell, they're relisting to try and get new eyes on the property. So we'll just see whether or not that trend continues. Okay, so this past week we had 296 sales, and 20% of those had no conditions on the offers. They sold with no conditions, and 31% sold at or above asking. So both of those kind of like percentages, 20% and 31%, have remained relatively steady. They kind of go up and down a little bit. Then we'll look at the number of sales within 7 days. So we had 46 properties sold within 7 days. That represented 16% of the sales this last week. 57% of those sold with no conditions, and 74% of those sold at or above asking price. The other thing we look at is properties that sold within 30 days of on the market. We had 199 properties sold. That was 67% of the sales this week, and 20% of those with no conditions, so the same as the overall, and 42% at or above asking price, which is obviously higher than the overall percentage this week. When we talk about at or above asking price, I like to look at that just to see whether or not people are pricing accurately or if they're underpricing. So it's continuing to stay that very few properties are being underlisted, but they usually end up being that example at the bottom of the page. But this week we had 92 properties that sold at or above asking price. So 45 of those, which was 49% of them, sold at asking or up to 1% above. So just very slightly over at or slightly above asking price. 36 of those properties, which was 39%, sold between 1 and 5% over the asking price. And 11 homes, which was 12%, sold more than 5% over the asking price. The highest percentages over and dollar amount over this week were the same property as they have been the last little while. The highest percent was 41% over asking price, and the highest dollar amount that represented $388,100 over asking. This house was a detached 3-bed sprawling bungalow, listed for $494,900, sold for $1,388,000. While I believe they might have underlisted a little bit, probably to stay under that million mark, it surprises me actually that this house sold for that much. It needed a lot of work. It was it was a 50s built bungalow, but it was very dated in its decor. It needed a total reno, but it also sided on a very busy road on Carling. So I don't know, why that went for that much. Maybe it was being bought up for redevelopment. It's possible. Okay, so that's the at or above asking. Okay, so next we'll look at more detail of what's happening in the different areas of the city, and then we'll get into the Ottawa Real Estate Board month-end stats and the other summary of the different month-end stats that I provide. Okay, so central urban region, we see that the active inventory was up across property types and the sales were down significantly, almost by half for the condos. So that was like a huge week last week for condos and a huge drop this week. Slight increase for detached and also down for towns as well. In Canada and Stittsville, the active inventory dropped for detached and towns and was up. Fairly big jump there for condos in Canada and Stittsville this week. And sales were down just slightly across property types this week, although towns it's down by 30%. In Barrhaven and Riverside South, the active inventory is up for detached, slightly up for condos. Again, huge number of condos for sale in Barrhaven and Riverside South right now. And there's a huge number of towns for sale, right, as well, although there was no change for the active inventory. Sales were down slightly for detached and up for towns, slightly down for condos. And finally, in Orleans, the active inventory was steady for detached, slightly up for towns, and down a bunch for condos. That's a bit more down to the normal level of condos for Orleans. Sales for Orleans were up huge for detached, 36 sales of detached homes this week. And then also up for towns and a little bit up for condos as well. As always, I've got all the full data in table format here for the detached and for the townhomes and for the condominiums. And I would note here, this week we saw that there was very few sales for condos, but look at how many conditionally sold properties there are. So citywide, there's 114 conditionally sold this week and only 67 sales. So I think this week was like a bit of a blip down. Next week we'll jump back up for the number of condo sales. That's my estimation. Okay, so next up is the monthly snapshot. I'm going to share the Ottawa Real Estate Board stuff and then go through those charts and stuff that I do for the end month as well. Okay, so the next two slides are the Ottawa Real Estate Board stats. This data is pulled from the Canadian Real Estate Association, which is CREA, and they do it every month. Now, if you haven't already, please go back and watch the video that's entitled Let's Talk Stats. It's from mid-March, and it explains the differences between these numbers and my numbers that I do weekly. Not only are they different geographic areas of what areas they're covering, so how many sales and stuff are different than mine because they cover different areas, but also their definitions of the different property types, and that's why the prices are such different prices than what I have in mind. So go back and look at that video, and I'll link it in the description here. But that explains why these prices are so different than what I normally share week to week. So these are the Canadian Real Estate Association stats, and their sales data shows that there was 1,545 units that sold in May in Ottawa, and that's down 9.2% from May 2023. And then they compare that to a 5-year average and the 10-year average, and they're down both of those. So up until this point, we had been up month to month, like from 2023 to 2024. This was the first month that was down, and that correlates with what the data that I share in my other monthly and weekly stats there. The MLS HPI benchmark prices, and again, go look at what those actually mean, because they are not the same as detached towns and condos. The composite all homes, the average benchmark price was just over 651,000. It's up 1.2% year on year. Single family homes average 736,000, up. They're all up just slightly there. And townhomes row average sale price of 517,000. Sorry, benchmark price, not sale prices. And the apartments benchmark price 425. So in all cases, year on year, the benchmark price is slightly higher than last year. Okay, so this is the Ottawa Real Estate Board market update. This is a slide that gets shared by a lot of different realtors across the city, and it has some good data there, but it also has a little bit of information that I can share that's beyond that. So we've got the new listings there. So the total number of new listings in May was 3,034. And that was 26.2% more new listings than in May 2023. And it was 23.2% over the 5-year and 10.2% over the 10-year averages for the number of new listings. Then it also has the active listings there, 3,552 active listings through May, which is 59.4% higher than May of 2023. And then 72.2% higher than the 5-year average. It's quite significant, but only 2.9% above the 10-year average. And that matches up with that other charts that I shared you before, where you saw that, the little red dots, they were significantly higher than what we've had for the last 4 to 6 years, depending on property type. But then if you look back the years before that, we actually had way higher inventory, and you had to go back to 2016 or 2018 to have higher inventory. But it all averages out. We're kind of in the middle. The days on market there, 16 days on market, seems low to me, but I'll trust their data. And then the months of inventory, which is not shown on here, the months of inventory was 2.3 for May 2024, and last year we were at 1.3 months of inventory. And that was because not only were the sales a little higher, but obviously the inventories through May were quite low last year, as we've seen in all the different charts. Okay, so this is my month-to-month average sale price, and this breaks it up into detached, semi-detached, freehold towns, condo row towns, and condo apartments. I did just slightly update the prices just to capture any last edits or changes or additions to the sales. Just slight changes there, nothing too big. Okay, and I did check to see if there was any updates needed for any of these next few charts, but there was nothing really needed for them. So we see that the close price to original list price sits sort of squarely at the 98.4 to 98.8%. So a little bit under asking is pretty standard at this point. This is the average days to sell, and this is where I was kind of like questioning whether or not they said it was the average time on market was 16 days, because these stats show a little difference, 24 to 28 days, actually 22 for towns, 24 to 28 for detached and condos. So don't know where the 16 comes from the Ottawa Real Estate Board stats, but this also I updated. This is the number of sales for the last 10 years. So it did go up just slightly from what I had calculated last week. So I guess a few more sales were reported there. But you do see that this is the lowest number of sales we've had, other than 2020, obviously, when everybody was locked down. The lowest number of sales in the last 10, 11 years there. And not by a little. That's fairly significant. This is the months of inventory. I got 2.6 for detached, 2.4 for condos, and then 1.6 for towns. And that probably does average out to the 2.3 that the board had shared. Makes sense. And you see that they're all climbing because the inventories are high, and the number of sales are not quite as high as they maybe should have been. And this is the overall months of inventory for all property types. And although it is starting to climb there, we still have a little ways to go to get to that actual, by definition, balanced market. But again, when you're comparing to those last 5 years where the numbers were really, really low, it does feel a lot like a balanced market, or potentially even a little bit buyer's market for a lot of buyers, because it's just so different than what we had the last number of years. Okay, so that's all I've got for this week. If you have any questions or comments, please get in touch or leave a comment in the YouTube comments. I hope you have a fantastic week, and I hope that we are past all this rain. We had a lot of rain in the last 4 days. So have a fantastic week, and I'll see you next week.